The work order said Suite 14B. The building directory said 14B was on the 4th floor. What it did not say, what no one had bothered to clarify when the service call came in at 6:47 in the morning, was that the 4th floor had been split into 2 wings after a renovation, and the east wing was the utility corridor while the west wing was something else entirely. Marcus Webb had no way of knowing that. He had bigger things on his mind. His daughter Lily had cried for 20 minutes before school that morning because her left shoe had a small scuff on it, a scuff that mattered very much to a 7-year-old who had laid out her clothes the night before and had a specific idea of how Tuesday was supposed to look. He had cleaned the scuff with a damp cloth, kissed her on the forehead, dropped her at the school gate 3 minutes before the bell, and driven straight to the Halverson Group building on West Capitol Avenue with one hand on the wheel and a half-empty coffee going cold in the cup holder. Now he was in the elevator with his tool bag on his shoulder, watching the floor numbers climb, doing the math in his head the way he always did. Boiler pressure valve on the 14th floor. Estimated repair time, 40 minutes. Back downstairs by 9. At the Elmwood Apartments by 10:15, where a burst pipe under the kitchen sink had been waiting since Saturday. Back to the school by 3 to pick up Lily. Stop at the grocery store. Help her with her reading homework. Dinner by 6:30 so she could be in bed by 8. That was the shape of a Tuesday. The elevator opened. He turned left because the directory had shown 14B on the left side of the floor plan, and he had looked at it for exactly 3 seconds in the lobby while signing in. 3 seconds was not long enough. The left side of the floor plan was the old floor plan, before the renovation. He walked down a carpeted hallway that was too quiet and too clean for a utility wing. He noticed the carpet. He noticed the way the light came from recessed fixtures rather than the standard overhead strips he usually worked under. He noticed a glass wall with frosted panels and a door that had no number on it but was slightly ajar. He pushed it open. The woman behind the desk looked up before the door had moved 6 inches. She was in the middle of a phone call. He could hear the faint sound of another voice coming through the receiver pressed to her ear. In front of her, spread across the wide surface of the desk in a way that suggested she had been working through them at speed, were documents. Many of them. The kind that come in labeled folders with colored tabs and the word confidential printed along the edge in small, serious letters. She did not say anything. Neither did he. For a moment, the only sounds in the room were the faint voice on the phone and the ventilation system doing its quiet, constant work behind the walls. Marcus looked at her. She looked at him. He looked at the documents on the desk. He did not read them, he was too far away to read them, and even if he hadn't been, he would not have tried. He registered their existence the same way you register the presence of something that doesn't belong to you. You see it. You note it. You look away. He stepped back. Pulled the door closed carefully, the way you close a door when someone inside is sleeping. No slam. No rush. Just a quiet click. He stood in the hallway for a moment. Then he pulled out the work order, looked at the suite number again, turned around, and walked back to the elevator. He rode down to the lobby, spoke to the front desk attendant, and was told, in a tone that suggested mild irritation at the error in the original work order, that 14B was in the East Wing. He took the correct elevator to the correct floor, found the boiler room, replaced the pressure valve, signed the service log, and left the building by 9:12. He did not mention the wrong door to anyone. It did not occur to him that there was anything to mention. He had opened the wrong door. He had seen a woman on a phone call. He had closed the door. These were not events that required a report. What he did not know, and would not know until 3 days later, was that the woman behind the desk had watched him close the door and had not gone back to her phone call for nearly 2 minutes. Her name was Diane Halverson. She was 51 years old and had been the chief executive of the Halverson Group for 9 years. She had built the company from a mid-size property management firm into one of the largest facility development corporations in the region. She worked 12-hour days as a matter of habit and slept 6 hours as a matter of necessity. She had been in the middle of a call with her legal team when the door opened, and what had been spread across her desk at that moment was not something that was supposed to leave her office. It was not something that was supposed to be seen by anyone who had not been specifically cleared to see it. She had looked at the man in the doorway. Work clothes. Tool bag on his shoulder. An expression on his face that moved through confusion, recognition, and resolution in about 4 seconds. And then he had pulled the door closed and walked away. He had not fumbled for an excuse. He had not asked questions. He had not lingered. He had simply understood that he was somewhere he was not supposed to be and removed himself from that somewhere without making it a scene. She stayed on the phone for another 40 minutes after that. When the call ended, she sat for a moment in the quiet of her office and thought about something she rarely thought about anymore, the specific quality of a person who, when handed an accidental advantage, simply puts it down and walks away. She pressed the intercom button on her desk. Her assistant came in 30 seconds later. She asked him to find out who had sent up a maintenance worker to the wrong floor that morning. He left to find out. She turned back to her documents. But the thought stayed with her, quiet and patient, the way important things sometimes do when they are not yet ready to announce themselves. Marcus drove to Elmwood that morning and fixed the pipe under the kitchen sink. He drove back to the service yard, filed his reports, picked up Lily from school, stopped at the grocery store, helped her read 4 pages of a book about a rabbit who wanted to be an astronaut, and made pasta for dinner. He did not think about the wrong door. He thought about the scuff on Lily's shoe, which he would need to check again in the morning. He thought about the pressure valve he'd replaced and whether the fitting would hold or whether he should call ahead to check. He thought about the 3 jobs scheduled for Wednesday and whether he would have enough time between the second and third to eat something that wasn't from a vending machine. The shape of a life made of small, necessary things. He was asleep by 10:15. 40 miles away, in an office that was still lit at that hour, Diane Halverson made a note on a yellow legal pad. Just a few words. A name she'd had her assistant track down from the service company's dispatch log. An idea that was still forming but that felt, in the quiet of the late evening, like the beginning of something worth considering. She did not act on it that night. But she circled the name. Marcus Webb. It sat there in blue ink on yellow paper, circled once, not underlined, not starred. Just circled, the way you circle a word when you want to come back to it. When you're not done thinking about it yet. Outside, the city ran its usual night course. Trucks on the highway. A dog somewhere on a nearby street. The ventilation system in the walls, doing its quiet, constant work. And in a small house in a neighborhood that was not expensive but was clean and had a decent school nearby, Marcus Webb slept. His daughter slept down the hall. Her shoe sat by the front door, scuff-free, laid out for the morning alongside its partner, ready for whatever Wednesday was supposed to look like. He had no idea what was coming. He had no reason to. 3 days passed the way 3 days pass when you are busy enough to stop watching the clock. Marcus worked. He picked up Lily. He cooked. He checked homework. He called his mother on Wednesday evening and talked to her for 11 minutes, which was about as long as either of them needed. He replaced a water heater in a dental office on Thursday, which took 4 hours longer than expected, and he stood in the parking lot afterward eating a cold sandwich and rereading the Friday schedule on his phone, doing the math again. He was in the service yard on Friday afternoon, loading his truck for the next morning, when his supervisor came out of the office with a look on his face that Marcus could not immediately read. His supervisor's name was Gary. Gary was a straightforward man who communicated in short sentences and who believed that most problems could be solved if people simply showed up on time and did what they said they were going to do. He was not a complicated person, which was one of the reasons Marcus had stayed with the company for 4 years. Working for uncomplicated people was an underrated thing. Gary said, "You went to the Halverson building on Tuesday?" Marcus said yes. Gary said, the fourth floor. West wing. Marcus paused for half a second. Then he said he'd gone to the wrong wing by mistake. Signed in to the right one after and did the job. Gary looked at him for a moment. Then he said, they called. Marcus waited. Gary said the Halverson Group had contacted the service company and asked for Marcus by name. Not just for a follow-up job. For a contract. A facilities maintenance contract, ongoing, for their main building and 2 satellite locations. Full-time rate. The possibility of direct employment after a 90-day review period. Marcus said, why me specifically? Gary said he didn't know. He said the request had come through the CEO's office, which was unusual, because requests like that usually came through a property manager or a facilities director. He said he'd verified it twice because it seemed like the kind of thing that could be a mistake. It was not a mistake. Marcus drove home with this information sitting on the passenger seat beside him like something he hadn't decided what to do with yet. He picked up Lily from her after-school program. He listened to her tell him about a disagreement she'd had with a girl named Poppy over whose turn it was to hold the class hamster. He made grilled cheese for dinner because it was Friday and Friday was always grilled cheese. After Lily was in bed, he sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and thought about it carefully. He was not the kind of man who assumed good things were mistakes. But he was also not the kind of man who accepted things without understanding them. There was a version of this situation that made complete sense, and there was a version of it that didn't, and he could not yet tell which version he was living in. The sensible version was this: he had done good work on the boiler repair, someone had noticed, and the contract was a result of a good professional reputation. That happened. Gary ran a solid operation. The company had references. The other version was harder to name. He had walked into the wrong room. He had seen something he wasn't supposed to see. And 3 days later, the person behind the desk in that room had specifically asked for him by name. He did not know what that meant. He could not know, sitting alone at a kitchen table at 9:30 on a Friday night, what was behind a decision made in an executive office he'd been inside for 4 seconds. He decided he would go to the meeting. He would learn what he was walking into. And he would make his decision from there. The meeting was scheduled for Monday morning at 10. He dropped Lily at school, drove to West Capitol Avenue, signed in at the lobby, and was taken up by a young assistant with a quiet manner and very precise shoes. The facilities director's name was Craig. He was organized and efficient and had clearly prepared for the meeting. He had a folder with information about the buildings, the scope of the contract, the rate structure, and the expected timeline. They were 15 minutes into it when the door opened. Diane Halverson walked in the way people walk into rooms when they are used to being the most important person in them, not with arrogance, exactly, but with a kind of settled certainty, a weight to every movement that came from years of being the one who decided things. She was wearing a dark jacket and had her reading glasses pushed up on her head. She looked at Craig first, then at Marcus. She sat down. She did not reference the wrong door. She did not reference the documents on her desk. She did not reference the phone call or the 4 seconds in which their eyes had met across the room. She asked Craig 2 questions about the contract terms, then she turned to Marcus and asked him 1 question. She said, "Do you know how to keep a confidence?" He looked at her steadily. He said, "Yes." She held his gaze for a moment in the way that people do when they are deciding whether something is true. Then she said, "Good." She stood, nodded at Craig, and walked out. Craig said, "So. Welcome aboard." Marcus drove home that afternoon with the signed paperwork on the passenger seat. He sat in the car outside the school for 10 minutes before Lily's program let out, just sitting, watching a pigeon walk back and forth on the pavement with great seriousness and apparent purpose. He thought about the question she had asked him. He thought about the fact that she had come into a meeting she had not been scheduled to attend, asked a single question, and left. He thought about the word confidence, which in one meaning referred to a secret and in another referred to a quality of trust. He thought it was probably both. He did not know yet what he had agreed to. But he had agreed to it honestly, which was the only way he knew how to agree to anything. He had said yes because yes was the true answer. He had never, in his life, repeated something that was not his to repeat. He did not intend to start now. Lily came through the school gate with her backpack listing sideways and her shoes still clean. She climbed in and said, "How was your day?" He said, "Interesting." She said, "Good interesting or bad interesting?" He thought about a woman who had watched him close a door 3 days ago and had apparently been thinking about it ever since. He said, "I'm not sure yet." She accepted this the way children accept things that are honest, which is easily. She pulled out a drawing she had done in art class and showed him a purple rabbit wearing what appeared to be a space helmet. He said it was excellent. She agreed. He drove them home. On his first official day under the contract, he arrived at the Halverson Group building at 7:30, collected his access badge, met the building's senior engineer, and got to work. He was thorough in everything he did because he had always been thorough, not because someone was watching. He learned the buildings the way he always learned buildings, by walking them slowly, looking at the things other people had stopped looking at, noting what worked and what was close to not working and what was already past the point of return. He was good at this. He had always been good at this. It was a skill that looked simple from the outside but required a particular kind of attention, a specific relationship with detail that not everyone had and that couldn't be faked. He did not think about the woman who had given him the job. He thought about the job. He did not run into Diane Halverson again for 2 weeks. When he did, it was in the lobby, briefly, as she was walking toward the elevators with her assistant and 2 other people. She gave him a small nod as she passed, the kind of nod that says "I see you" and nothing more. He nodded back. That was enough. He was learning the shape of this new arrangement. It was professional and precise and respectful of distance, which suited him. He was not looking for a friendship or a story. He was looking for work that paid well enough to stop the weekend shifts at the hardware store, which had been quietly draining him for 18 months. By the 3rd week, he had already identified 7 maintenance issues that the previous contractor had missed. He fixed 4 of them without being asked, flagged the other 3 in a written report to Craig, and was told the report was unusually thorough. He said he'd just been paying attention. Craig said that was, apparently, not as common as it should be. Marcus went back to work. It was in the 4th week that he found the access panel. The trouble with buildings is that they remember everything. Pipes remember pressure. Wires remember heat. And ceilings, in old buildings that have been renovated without being fully gutted, sometimes remember the original architecture in ways that the current floor plans do not reflect. The Halverson Group's main building had been renovated 8 years ago. The floor plans Marcus had been given were thorough and professional and reflected the current state of the building accurately, except for one thing: a section of the east wing on the 12th floor that showed a standard ceiling cavity but actually contained a secondary access panel that led to a crawl space running the length of the executive corridor above it. Marcus found it on a Tuesday, while tracking an intermittent airflow problem in the 12th floor HVAC return. He was not supposed to find it. It was not on any map. It was simply there, the way old buildings are full of things that are simply there, waiting for someone patient enough to look. He went in because the airflow problem required him to go in. The crawl space was low, he had to move on his hands and knees, his work light clipped to his collar, the beam cutting through a decade of dust. He located the blockage in the return duct, which turned out to be a collapsed flex section, exactly the kind of thing that fails quietly and slowly and looks like nothing until suddenly it is very much something. He replaced the section. He tested the airflow. He was satisfied. He was making his way back toward the access panel when he heard voices below him. He was directly above the executive corridor. The floor between him and the corridor was thin, older construction, with acoustic properties that had not been a priority in the original build. He could hear the voices clearly. Not loudly, but clearly. Two voices. He recognized neither of them. He was not trying to listen. He had found what he came to find and fixed what needed fixing and was on his way out. But the crawl space was narrow and progress was slow and the voices were close and the words were clear. He heard one of the voices say Halverson. He kept moving. He heard the other voice say vote. He kept moving. He heard the first voice say, she doesn't know it's happening yet. That's the point. By the time she does, the count is already there. He stopped. He stayed still for a moment in the dark and the dust, his work light casting a small circle on the crawl space wall beside him, the voices coming up through the floor with a clarity that felt almost deliberate, almost like the building itself had decided he should hear this. He did not move for perhaps 30 seconds. Then he moved slowly and quietly toward the access panel, lowered himself out, closed the panel carefully behind him, and stood in the maintenance corridor on the 12th floor. His heart was doing something it did not normally do. Not panic. Not quite. Something more like the feeling of standing at the edge of something you had not expected to find and not yet knowing whether to step toward it or back. He picked up his tools. He walked to the service elevator. He rode it down to the basement level where the maintenance office was. He sat at the small desk in the corner that had become his and wrote up his report on the collapsed flex section in the HVAC return. He described the location, the failure mode, the repair, the materials used, and the test results. He wrote it in the same careful, factual way he wrote all his reports. When he was done, he sat for a moment and looked at the report. And then he thought about what else he had heard, which was not in the report. He thought about it the way you think about something that is not your business but that is sitting inside your chest and growing heavier by the minute. Two voices in a corridor. A name. A word. A plan, described plainly, without hesitation, in the middle of an office building on a Tuesday morning, because the people speaking had no reason to believe anyone could hear them. He gathered his things. He drove to the school. He picked up Lily. She said, "You're quiet." He said, thinking. She said, "About what?" He said, "Work stuff." She said, "Is it hard?" He thought about that. He said, "Not the work part." She didn't ask what the other part was. She was 7, and she was smart enough to know when a question would not find an answer yet. Instead, she told him about a book she'd started during reading time, about a girl who finds a door in her backyard that leads to a different kind of place, and how she wasn't sure yet if it was a good different or a bad different. Marcus said, "How will she know?" Lily thought about it. She said, "I think she'll know by what she does when she gets there." He did not say anything to that. But he heard it. That night, after Lily was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table for a long time. He had a pen in his hand and a piece of paper in front of him, and he was not writing yet, just sitting, the pen between his fingers, thinking about what he knew and what he didn't and what the difference between the two actually meant. He knew the voices had been discussing a plan to remove Diane Halverson from her position before she was aware it was happening. He knew the word vote, which in a corporate context meant a board vote. He knew the phrase, "By the time she does, the count is already there," which meant the decision was intended to be locked before she could respond to it. He did not know who the voices belonged to. He did not know the details of the plan. He did not know whether what he had overheard was legal, whether it was the kind of thing that happened in companies all the time and was simply business, or whether it was the kind of thing that was being done specifically to harm someone. What he did know was this: he had been hired because Diane Halverson had believed he was someone who kept confidences. And now he was sitting on something that was both a confidence and a threat, and he did not know which weight was heavier. He also knew something simpler and older than any of that. He thought about Lily saying she would know by what she does when she gets there. He thought about the way his daughter moved through her small life with an instinct for fairness that he had never taught her and had never needed to, because it seemed to have arrived with her, like her eye color and her stubbornness and the specific way she cocked her head when she was about to disagree with something. He thought about the kind of man he wanted to be when she was old enough to see him clearly. He picked up the pen. He began to write. Not a report. Not a formal document. Just words, in his own handwriting, on a plain piece of paper. What he had heard. When. Where. As precisely as he could recall it. The exact words, because he had a good memory for things that mattered, and this had mattered the moment he heard it, even before he'd understood why. He wrote for about 20 minutes. Then he read it back to himself once. Then he folded it, put it in an envelope, and set it on the table. He looked at it for a while. He did not seal it. He went to bed. He did not sleep well. He lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling, the real ceiling, plaster and paint, no crawl spaces, no voices, and let the problem sit inside him the way problems do when they are not yet ready to be solved. In the morning, he made Lily's breakfast. He checked her shoes. He drove her to school. He drove to the Halverson Group building. He went to work. He did not go near the executive corridor. He had 3 legitimate jobs on 3 other floors, and he did them methodically and well. At the end of the day, he signed out, drove home, and sat at the kitchen table again. The envelope was still there. He picked it up. He sealed it. He held it in both hands for a moment. He thought, I do not know this woman. I do not owe her anything beyond the work I agreed to do. I could put this in a drawer and go on. Whatever happens in boardrooms is not my world. I am a maintenance worker. I fix things that are broken. That is my job. And then he thought, I do know something. I know it, and I know what it means. And the question is not whether it's my world. The question is whether I can look at my daughter across a dinner table for the next 30 years and honestly say I did not have a choice. He set the envelope on the kitchen table. He went and made dinner. He told himself he would decide by morning. He already knew what he was going to do. It took him 2 more days to do it. He spent those days doing the job the way he always did, methodically, attentively, without complaint. He fixed a pressure issue in the second-floor cooling system. He replaced a failing bearing in one of the main ventilation fans, a repair he did in the very early morning before most of the building's occupants arrived. He filed his reports. He answered Craig's questions. He behaved, to all outward appearances, like a man who was completely at peace with the shape of his Tuesday and his Wednesday. Inside, he was not at peace. He was not frightened, exactly. He was something more precise than frightened. He was aware, with a clarity that was almost physical, that he was standing at a point where 2 different paths led away in different directions and that once he stepped in either direction, he could not come back to this moment of standing still. He had written down what he heard. He had sealed the envelope. He had put it in the inside pocket of his work jacket and carried it there for 2 days, and each morning when he put on the jacket he felt the slight weight of it against his chest, paper and words and a decision not yet made into an action. On the 3rd morning, he arrived at the building at his usual time. He signed in. He collected his badge. He went to the maintenance floor and put down his bag. He took the envelope out of his jacket pocket. He stood with it in his hand for a moment. Then he walked to the elevator. He rode up to the 14th floor. West Wing. He walked down the carpeted hallway. He stopped outside the door with no number on it. He listened. No voices inside. No phone call. He pushed the door open. The office was empty. He stepped inside. He crossed to the desk, which was clean and organized, nothing on its surface today except a closed laptop, a glass of water, and a small framed photograph of a coast he did not recognize. He set the envelope on the desk in the center, where it could not be missed. He looked at it for a moment. He walked back to the door. He went downstairs. He went back to work. He spent the next hour on the ground floor, replacing a sensor in the main entry lobby's climate control panel. It was precise, careful work that required his full attention, and he gave it his full attention, because whatever else was happening, the sensor needed replacing and his job was to replace it. His phone was in his jacket pocket. He was aware of it the way you are aware of something that is either going to ring or isn't, and that until it does or doesn't there is nothing to do about it. It rang at 8:43. He looked at the screen. Unknown number. He answered. A woman's voice. The assistant. He recognized the precise, quiet manner from the first day. She said, "Mr. Webb. Miss Halverson would like to see you." He said, "Now?" She said, "Yes." He put down his tools. He rode the elevator to the 14th floor. The door to the office was open. Diane Halverson was standing when he came in. Not behind her desk. Standing to the side of it, near the window that overlooked the street below, with one arm crossed over her chest and the other hanging at her side, the envelope open in her hand, the 2 sheets of his handwritten notes in her other hand. She looked at him when he came in. He stopped a few feet inside the door. She said, "How did you hear this?" He told her. The crawl space. The HVAC repair. The location above the corridor. He told her clearly and in order. He did not apologize for being in the crawl space, because he had been there for a legitimate reason. He did not apologize for hearing the voices, because he had not sought them out. He told her only what was true, in the order it had happened. She listened without interrupting. When he was finished, she was quiet for a moment. She looked at the handwritten notes again, though she had clearly already read them. She looked at his handwriting, neat and even, the kind of handwriting that belongs to someone who was taught to be careful with things and took the lesson seriously. She said, "Why did you come forward?" He thought about his answer before he gave it. He had known this question was coming. He had thought about it at the kitchen table and in the car and in the spaces between jobs when his hands were busy but his mind was not. He said, "I have a kid. I am trying to be someone she would recognize." Diane Halverson did not answer immediately. She turned toward the window. She stood there for a moment, her back to him, looking down at the street where the morning was already in full motion, people moving along the pavement with the specific purposeful energy of a city getting on with things. He waited. When she turned back, her face was composed, the way faces are when something has moved through them and been held steady. She said, "Thank you." He nodded. She said, "I need to make some calls." He understood that this meant he was excused. He walked to the door. She said his name. He stopped. She said, "Your badge will work tomorrow." He had not realized he'd been wondering whether it would. He said, "All right." He went back downstairs. He picked up his tools. He finished the sensor replacement in the lobby. He filed his report. At the end of the day, he drove to the school and picked up Lily. She came through the gate with her backpack and her clean shoes and a drawing she had made in the morning of a bird that appeared to be conducting an orchestra. She said, "What are you smiling about?" He said, "Nothing in particular." She said, "You always say that when it's actually something." He said, "Maybe." She showed him the bird. He said the bird had excellent posture for a conductor. She said it was the most important thing a conductor could have. He agreed. They drove home. He made dinner. The ordinary kind. The kind that didn't mean anything except that someone had thought about it in advance and come home in time to make it. Lily ate 2 full servings, which she only did when she was happy, and told him the plot of the book about the girl with the door in her backyard, which had advanced significantly during the day's reading period and had reached the point where the girl understood that the other place was not better or worse than her own, it was just different, and that she could come back whenever she needed to. Marcus listened to every word. He washed the dishes after she was in bed. He stood at the sink for a moment, looking at the window above it, which reflected the kitchen light back at him, his own face looking back from the dark glass. He looked like a man who had done the right thing. He was not entirely sure the right thing would protect him. He was not certain of what came next or what the people behind those voices would do when they realized their plan had been heard. He knew the world was not a simple machine that rewarded good choices with good outcomes in neat, proportionate ways. But he had not done it for a reward. He dried his hands. He turned off the kitchen light. He went to bed, and this time he slept. The badge worked. He found out at 7:29 the following morning, when he held it to the reader at the main entrance and heard the quiet tone and the click of the lock giving way. He had not been certain it would. He had told himself on the drive-in that whatever happened, he had made his choice and the choice was made and the outcome was not his to control. But the badge worked, and he was honest enough with himself to notice the relief that moved through him when it did. He went to work. He did not hear from Diane Halverson directly for the next 4 days. He did his job. He was thorough. He wrote his reports. He answered Craig's questions. He learned the buildings the way he had been learning them, slowly and attentively, finding the things that were about to fail and addressing them before they did. On the 5th day, Craig called him into the facilities office and told him that the board review scheduled for the following month had been postponed. He said it in the tone of a man relaying information he had been told to relay without context, and Marcus received it in the tone of a man who understood exactly why the review had been postponed and had no intention of saying so. He said, "All right." Craig said, "Also, the company is starting an internal audit of the maintenance logs from the previous contractor. Your reports are going to be part of the basis for that." Marcus said he'd make sure everything was documented clearly. Craig said that was exactly what was needed. Marcus went back to work. Over the following weeks, things shifted in ways that were small enough to be easy to miss if you weren't paying attention and large enough to matter a great deal if you were. His contract was extended. Not just extended, expanded. The satellite locations were added to his scope in a way that reflected a genuine trust in his judgment, not just an increase in workload. Craig began consulting him before making facility decisions, which was unusual for a maintenance worker and which Marcus handled by giving careful, honest answers and not overreaching. His rate was adjusted upward. Not dramatically. But enough. He stopped working the Saturday shifts at the hardware store. The first Saturday morning he didn't have to go in, he woke at his usual time, lay in bed for a moment aware of the absence of an obligation, then got up and made pancakes with Lily, who was deeply suspicious of this development and cross-examined him about it over breakfast. She wanted to know if pancakes on Saturday meant something had changed. He said something had changed a little. She said, "Good change?" He said, "Yes." She ate 3 pancakes, which was her record. The school Lily had been waitlisted for a small, good school with a music program and a science teacher who kept live beetles in the classroom, sent a letter. There was a place available in the fall. The letter was polite and understated and used the word pleased several times. Marcus read it at the kitchen table on a Thursday morning while Lily was brushing her teeth, and he read it twice, and then he folded it and put it in the kitchen drawer where he kept important things. He told Lily about it at dinner. She asked if there would still be reading time. He said yes, more of it. She said, "And the Beatles?" He said, "Yes." She said, "Then okay." He had not told anyone about the crawl space. He had not told Gary, who had asked once, casually, whether everything at the Halverson building was going well, and Marcus had said it was going very well and left it there. He had not told his mother, though she had noticed during their Wednesday call that something was different about him and had said so, directly, in the way his mother noticed things and said them. He had said, "Work is going better." She had said, "Is that all?" He had said, "That's the main thing." She had let it rest, which was one of the things he appreciated about his mother. He ran into Diane Halverson again in late autumn, in the lobby, in the morning. She was alone this time, which was unusual. No assistant, no group of people around her, just her and a coffee and a coat she was still buttoning. She stopped when she saw him. He said good morning. She said good morning. And then, instead of moving on the way she usually did, she stopped and said, "How's the job?" He said it was good. He said he'd found a few things in the third satellite location that had been patched over rather than properly repaired. He said he'd addressed them. She nodded. She said, "I heard about the HVAC report you submitted for the Elmwood site." Craig said it was unusually detailed. He said he'd just been paying attention. She said, "I know." She paused. She looked at him for a moment in the way she had looked at him the first day in the meeting room, assessing and direct. Then she said, "There is a program. The company runs it for employees in operations who want to move into building management and development. Classroom instruction, site visits, mentoring. A pathway." She said, "I submitted your name." He looked at her. She said, "You don't have to decide now." He said, "Why me?" She said, "You already know the answer to that." She finished buttoning her coat. She said, "Think about it." She walked to the elevator. He stood in the lobby for a moment, holding his badge in one hand, looking at the elevator doors that had just closed. He thought about it. He thought about it all day. He thought about it on the drive to pick up Lily. He thought about it sitting in the car outside the school, watching the pigeon again, or possibly a different pigeon, it was difficult to tell. Lily came through the gate. She climbed in. She looked at him. She said, "You have that face again." He said, "What face?" She said, "The thinking one. The good kind." He pulled into traffic. He said, "Someone offered me something today." She said, "What kind of something?" He said, "A chance to learn more. To do more. Something different from what I do now." She thought about this. She said, "Is it scary?" He said, "A little." She said, "Is that bad?" He thought about a woman who had watched him close a door and circled his name on a piece of paper. He thought about a crawl space and a sealed envelope and a question about whether he knew how to keep a confidence. He thought about the badge working. The school letter in the drawer. Pancakes on Saturday morning. He said, "No. I don't think so." Lily looked out the window at the city going by. She said, "Then you should probably do it." He said, "Yeah." He said, "I probably should." That evening, after dinner, after Lily was in bed, he sat at the kitchen table again. The same table. The same chair. But the kitchen felt different from the kitchen where he had sat with an envelope in front of him, wondering what kind of man he was. He knew what kind of man he was now. Or he was closer to knowing. He was getting there. He picked up his phone and sent Craig a message. He said he was interested in the program. He said he would like more information when Craig had time. He put the phone down. Outside, the night was doing what nights do in late autumn, cool and quiet, the trees giving up the last of their leaves with a kind of graceful practicality, letting go of what they didn't need for the winter ahead. Marcus sat for a while longer. Then he got up, washed his cup, turned off the lights, checked the front door. He walked down the hall. He stopped outside Lily's room. The door was open. She was asleep on her side, her arm around a stuffed rabbit she had named Captain, for reasons she had never fully explained. Her shoes were lined up by her door, clean and ready. He stood there for a moment, just long enough to hold the image, to carry it forward. Then he went to bed. He slept well. He had no idea how much further things would go from here. He did not know what the program would teach him or where it would lead or what the next Tuesday would bring, because life is not a thing you can map from a single floor plan, and the only honest answer to what comes next is that you show up, you pay attention, and you do the work. But he had started. And sometimes that is the only thing that needs to be true.